The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, the kind that pressed down on the skin and wrapped around the lungs like unseen hands. The dim candlelight cast flickering shadows against the rough stone walls of the underground chamber, their movements unnatural, as if responding to something beyond the physical realm. The researcher sat at a plain wooden table, his fingers resting on the edges of an old, worn notebook, though his eyes were locked on the empty space in front of him, the chair that sat directly across from him, waiting to be filled. He had spent years leading to this moment, chasing whispers in forgotten texts, piecing together clues buried in historical accounts that most scholars dismissed as superstition. He had spoken to those who claimed to have knowledge of the unseen world, and most had refused to engage in conversation, their expressions turning grim at the mere suggestion of summoning a Jinn. Some had warned him. Others had laughed, calling him a fool who was looking for something best left undiscovered, but he had not turned back. He had never been one to accept limitations, nor had he ever believed that the world was limited to what the eye could perceive. The ritual had taken weeks to prepare. Each line of the incantation had been memorized, each symbol carefully drawn with red sand that had been sourced from a location known only in whispers. The placement of the candles had been precise, positioned in a pattern that mirrored the designs found in a centuries-old manuscript, a text that had allegedly driven its previous owner to madness. The air smelled of burnt sage and something metallic, a scent that had no clear origin. The room had been silent for what felt like an eternity, a silence so deep that the sound of his own heartbeat seemed intrusive. He had expected something dramatic, sudden gusts of wind, an unnatural flickering of flames, a shift in the temperature that would mark the arrival of something otherworldly. But there had been nothing, only stillness. He had repeated the incantation, his voice unwavering despite the tension that settled in his chest, and then, as if the world itself had exhaled, it spoke. The voice did not come from a singular direction. It was everywhere, layered and distorted, as if it existed in multiple places at once. It was not loud, nor did it need to be. It vibrated through the walls, through the air, settling into the very core of his being. "You wanted to speak to me." The researcher felt his breath catch in his throat. He had prepared for this, had spent countless nights imagining what it would be like to hear a voice that did not belong to this world. Yet, no amount of preparation could have made this feel normal. "You called me," the voice continued, its tone unreadable. "Now, ask your questions." The researcher reached for the small recording device that sat on the table, pressing the button to ensure that every word was captured. He hesitated only briefly before speaking. "Are you?" There was a pause, not the kind that suggested hesitation, but the kind that carried weight, as if the very act of responding required thought beyond human comprehension. "You already know what I am," the voice said at last. "You would not have risked this if you did not." The researcher exhaled, steadying himself. "I need to hear it from you." A shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. "I am Jinn," the voice responded. "I have existed before the rise of your kind. I have watched civilizations grow and collapse, witnessed the passing of empires, the rise of belief and the fall of kings. I have walked unseen among your kind, whispered into the ears of the powerful, remained in the shadows where your eyes do not reach." The researcher felt the weight of those words settle over him. He had read accounts of Jinn, of their existence woven into the fabric of human history, present in myths, religions, and the folklore of countless cultures. But to hear it spoken aloud by something that claimed to be one of them was something else entirely. What did Jinn think of humans? For the first time, the voice made a sound that resembled amusement, though it lacked the warmth of human laughter. It was something else, something stretched and hollow, as though it carried an undertone of mockery. humans, the voice mused. You believe yourselves to be rulers of this world, masters of your own fate. You see yourselves as the highest of beings, the center of all things. The researcher felt a cold shiver creep along his spine. You think you understand your place in this world, the voice continued. You do not. You walk through your lives blind to the forces that surround you. You claim dominion over the earth, yet you cower in the face of what you do not understand. You fear the dark, but do not ask why. You whisper prayers when you are alone, but do not question what you are truly afraid of. The researcher tightened his grip on the pen in his hand, but he did not speak. You are fragile, the voice said, softer now, though no less unsettling. Easily influenced, easily broken. You look to the stars and imagine yourselves destined for greatness, yet your minds are so easily swayed, your hearts so easily corrupted. A whisper in the right moment, a thought planted like a seed, and your kind can be led in any direction. The researcher forced himself to remain still. Some of us watch, the Jinn continued. Some of us whisper. Some of us interfere. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. You mean possession, the researcher said. Another pause, but this time the silence carried something else. Not hesitation, consideration. Possession, the voice repeated, as if the word itself was unimportant. Your kind has always feared such things. You believe it to be rare. It is not in the way you think. True possession is not always forceful. It is not always violent. Sometimes it is something much simpler. The researcher felt his pulse quicken. A suggestion, the voice said. A thought that does not belong to you, but that you accept as your own. A whisper in the ear of a man who believes himself to be in control. A decision made without understanding its origin. A shift in desire. A sudden impulse. A fleeting emotion that changes the course of a life, a nation, a world. The room seemed colder now. The researcher could feel his breath against his skin, the dampness of sweat forming along his spine. Your kind believes in power, the Jinn continued. You build empires, create laws, forge weapons to make yourselves feel safe. But tell me, human, if you are so powerful, why do you still fear the unseen? Why do you seek answers in places you are warned not to tread? Why do you call upon that which you cannot control? The researcher opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the flames of the candles flickered violently, stretching unnaturally toward the ceiling, their light casting distorted shadows that did not match the shapes within the room. The symbols on the floor seemed darker now, their edges sharper, as though they had deepened into the very stone beneath them. The voice came again, softer this time, almost close. You have asked your questions, human. The candlelight wavered, as if something unseen had passed through the room. The researcher felt the shift in the air, an unspoken tension that made his skin crawl. He was aware of the risks involved in this conversation, of the dangers whispered about in the oldest texts, yet he had not anticipated the weight of the presence before him. The Jinn's voice was neither loud nor aggressive, but it carried an authority that could not be ignored. It had answered his questions with unsettling clarity, peeling away the illusion of human dominance with every word, but there was more he needed to know. You say humans are easily influenced, the researcher said, steadying his breath. Easily manipulated. That thoughts can be planted, decisions altered without us even realizing it. But why? What is the purpose? A moment of silence followed, stretching far too long for comfort. Then the voice returned, smooth and deliberate. Purpose? It mused. You assume there is always purpose in influence, that there must be a grand scheme behind every shift in your thoughts, every whisper that guides your actions. But not everything follows your human concept of intent. Sometimes it is curiosity. Sometimes it is amusement. Sometimes it is simply nature. The researcher frowned. Are you saying it's instinctive? That jinn do this the way humans breathe? A low chuckle, not quite human, reverberated through the chamber. Worth, you wish to categorize it, the jinn said, to define it in a way that fits within the limits of your understanding. That is your kind's greatest flaw. This constant need to label, to rationalize, to believe that all things must fit within the framework of your knowledge. But the world is not built for your understanding. You are merely guests. The researcher tightened his grip on his pen, noting how the ink smudged slightly under the pressure of his fingers. He could feel the weight of the jinn's words settling over him. If we are guests, he said carefully, then who are the true inhabitants? The room seemed to darken, the candle flames casting elongated shadows that did not match the objects in the chamber. The symbols drawn into the ground pulsed faintly, almost as if something within them had awakened. There are many, the jinn answered, its tone quieter now, more measured. More than your kind has ever imagined. Some walk alongside you, unseen but ever present. Some exist where you will never tread. Others have no name in your language, no place in your history, because they have ensured that you never remember them. The researcher swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. Are jinn the only ones who influence us? A pause. The air grew heavier. No, the voice said, and, with that single word, the temperature in the room dropped further. The researcher glanced toward the recorder, ensuring the device was still functioning. The red light blinked steadily, capturing every word, every sound, every breath. And what else? He pressed, his voice steadier than he felt. Another silence. But this time, it was different. It wasn't hesitation. It was something else. Something almost like consideration, as if the jinn was weighing the consequences of its response. There are those who shape your world in ways you will never comprehend, it said finally. Those who exist outside your perception, yet dictate the course of your history. Your kind has glimpsed them in dreams, in shadows, in moments when the veil between your reality and theirs thins. But you were never meant to understand them. That is why you forget. The researcher's pulse quickened. We forget? A low hum filled the air, a sound that did not belong to the chamber, did not belong to the world he knew. It resonated deep in his chest, vibrating against his ribs. You have always forgotten, the jinn said. It is why history repeats itself, why the mistakes of one age become the burdens of the next. There are forces that erase, that alter, that ensure knowledge does not survive where it is not meant to. And so you move forward, blind to the hands that guide you. The researcher felt an overwhelming urge to look behind him, though he knew nothing should be there. Who are they? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The candles flickered violently. A sudden gust of wind rushed through the room, though there was no source for it. The walls seemed to tremble, the symbols on the floor darkening, stretching unnaturally as if reacting to the question itself. You do not want that answer, the jinn said. And for the first time there was something in its tone that resembled warning. The researcher hesitated. There was a fine line between discovery and destruction, between knowledge and madness. He had always believed himself prepared to cross it, but now, sitting in the presence of something ancient, something beyond human comprehension, he wasn't so sure. He took a slow breath, his fingers tightening around the pen in his hand. The answer came, quiet, deliberate, final.